Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 3 of Fitness and Money, Maximizing Your Health and Wealth. And I'm probably going to go over this each episode. The reason that we named this vlog, if you want to call it, Fitness and Money, Maximizing Your Health and Wealth, is that we want to put emphasis on the health portion. We want to try to minimize, to the extent possible, that we're going to come down with, some type of chronic disease, or we want to be in shape, basically, and give ourselves the best chance possible, because without that, I'm not sure that any of the money that we have accumulated is going to matter if we come down with some serious illness and we'll either have a compromised living situation, or God forbid if we, pass away or something like that. That money's not going to mean anything. So that's why we emphasize the health portion of it. So we're going to finish off back today. The first 2 episodes, we did 2 compound exercises. We did 1-arm dumbbell rows and we did bent over dumbbell rows, and both hitting kind of 2 different parts of your back. However, very necessary to do both of them. They're called compound exercises because not only are you involving your back when you do these exercises, you're also involving your biceps, which is a smaller muscle. So as you saw in the first 2 episodes, we want to minimize the amount of bicep work that we're doing when we do our back. That's going to be key because our bicep is smaller. It's going to give out quicker than our back muscle, which is much larger. So we always want to keep that in mind when we're doing these exercises. We're always going to emphasize doing the correct form, and doing the correct form and doing the exercise in it correctly, we're going to be able to get the most out of it. So I do encourage everyone to go back to episode 1 and 2 to review kind of the principles, guidelines, what the podcast is going to be, what it's not going to be, what the expectations are. And again, I would emphasize that everybody should go through those first 2 before watching this 3rd one if you're new. The other thing is, I want to make sure that everybody understands that, I choose to use what's called a power block, which is a version of a dumbbell, but you can also use dumbbells, kettlebells, bands, straps, and I went all over all that in the first episode. That's why I think it's important to watch it. So without further ado, let's get into pullovers, dumbbell pullovers. And again, this is going to work your latissimus dorsi muscles. It's also going to, depending how we do it, it might work your chest as well. So it's a really good compound exercise. And, it's going to just overall give you a really good stretch. Okay, so a couple of different ways that you can get the dumbbell in your hands. I recommend putting the dumbbell back where your head is going to be. It's just easier to do that. Now, if you get up into very, very heavy weights, you may not be able to lift that off the ground effectively. And I'll show you a different way to do it, but because we're kind of beginners here and we're going over, kind of the very basic level, we're gonna start this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to get on the bench as so. We're going to lean back, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that our head is over the bench, but we don't want to make sure, what we want to make sure doesn't happen is that our neck is hanging over. We don't want to do this because if our neck hangs over, we're going to put stress on the neck, and we absolutely don't want to do that. So I would say maybe your head over, just a slight bit. You'll kind of know when if your neck is hanging over the bench, and that won't be good. So this is the way that we're going to do this exercise. We're going to grab on to the dumbbell as such, and we're going to bring it up here. Now you notice I'm not bringing it up here to which is called a static position. I'm bringing the dumbbell back here. What this will do is it will always keep tension on the muscle, as opposed to anytime you bring something in the static position, you lose that tension. So we're going to keep it right here. Again, you can put your feet up on the bench if you want. You can put your feet down here if you want. I choose to keep it on the bench. It's personal preference. It doesn't matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower the dumbbell back as far as we can, and then we're going to bring it up. We're going to lower the dumbbell back, and then we're going to bring it up. We're going to lower the dumbbell back, and we're going to bring it up. Again, we don't want to come up here with it. And the other thing that we absolutely don't want to do is, for this back exercise, we don't want to bring things up straight. We don't want your elbows straight out. You could do that. You could have your elbows straight out as opposed to bent. We like to do it bent. That's going to optimize your back. If you do it straight out, you're going to start working your chest, and you're also going to start pulling on your core a little bit more. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but for our application here, we're just going to do basically this. That's the entire movement. I would say if you want to do, and I think I went over this in a previous episode, the proper repetition range is probably anywhere from 8 to 10. If you're not able to get 6 repetitions from an exercise, I think your weight is too heavy. If you're able to get more than 12, you might want to increase your weight a little bit so that you can get back in that 8 to 10 repetition range. I think that that's a good range. So now I'm going to show you, and you can choose to do this. If you don't want the weight sitting on the floor in back of you, you can always have the weight positioned. You can always have the weight positioned as such. And this is right at my knees. So you can go down, you can grab it, and then you can bring it up and then go back. Sometimes it's easier if the weight is heavy to be able to bring it up here as opposed to just using your arms when you're pulling it up from back there. But again, at the basic level, at the beginner level, if and when, assuming we're not using super heavy weights, that method would be okay. But I'll show this to you just for future if anybody wants to do it. So you would reach down, you would go back, you would come up, and you would just start doing the exercise. So by doing it this way, when you're done with it, you simply pop up and then put the weight back down. So, enough said there. Okay, so that was our third exercise. We are going to be doing more back exercises. They'll be in succeeding episodes, but I did want to show you those 3. So 3 basic exercises, and we're going to be able to pretty much work our entire back. We'll be doing some variations and getting cute with a little thing, with some exercises as we go forward. But for right now, we've got 1 arm dumbbell rows, we've got bent over rows, and we just did the dumbbell pullover. So that kind of ends it for back, at least right now. The other thing that I wanted to mention, you know, people have this kind of thought built up that when you're lifting weights, it's called anaerobic. Anaerobic means without oxygen. People that do anaerobic activity, they think of things like weightlifting. Aerobic activity, I think we've all heard that. We know what that is. If you're out biking, if you're out running, anything where you get your oxygen level and your heart rate up, that's going to basically be an aerobic activity. I've recently taken up pickleball. Never thought I would. A lot of young people, a lot of older people. And let me tell you, by the end of a match or just running around the court, you know, you've burned some serious calories and you've got your heart rate up. So I'm going to make a point now, a counterpoint to aerobic versus anaerobic. I think that there is the possibility to do both. And when we get to the portion where we start our workouts, we're absolutely going to incorporate what I'm going to tell you right now. The way that you can incorporate both aerobic and anaerobic into your routines is by taking less rest between sets. I think we've all gone to the gym or even at home, but I know when I was going to the gym that I would see people do a set and they would go over and talk to a buddy, go to get a drink, do whatever, and probably 3 minutes have gone by before they do their next set. Personally, I don't think that's beneficial at all. Honestly, I think they should just leave and go find some other activity. The exception being, if you're a power lifter and you are trying to lift the absolute most amount of weight and your repetition range is anywhere from 1 to 6, I guess, then you could certainly be wanting to take more rest between sets. This particular vlog is not going to cover powerlifting. This is a body toning, fitness, using the right form, and doing select exercises to get you where you want to be. So to put that at rest. So taking rest between sets is going to be important because there's something called lactic acid, which builds up in your system when you lift weights. If you wait too long to start your next set, all the lactic acid is gone and you're kind of, your body's saying, okay, when are you going to do that next set? Or yeah, next set. If you take too little time between sets, your body hasn't had the chance to clear out all of the lactic acid, and it's really important that it's able to do that. So I found over lots of years of weightlifting that if you want to get a great anaerobic and aerobic exercise, the optimal time frame between sets is going to be 30 seconds. Now, 30 seconds is not a lot of time. I have a timer on my Apple device, and I put it on, and boom, every 30 seconds I'm doing another set. So what that forces is you're going to start sweating more. Your heart rate's going to go up faster. While doing that anaerobic exercise, whatever it might be, bent over dumbbell rows. If you do those sets within a 30-second time frame for each set, your body's going to get tired. It's going to get tired physically, but it's going to get tired aerobically and anaerobically. So I think it's super important to kind of keep your time between sets at about 30 seconds. I think that's probably the optimal time. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, is as you can see, as I've told you, I'm at home. I have a setup here in my basement, and it's not completely optimal. The set isn't perfection. Again, it's in my basement. What I can tell you, and this is from me watching a lot of YouTube videos or just blogs and vlogs and whatnot, it's not really the presentation that matters as much as the content. What the surroundings are and what's going on is not nearly as important as what the person speaking is telling you. That's really the most important part. So, I honestly ad-lib this. I started out, I'll even show you. I started out with a whiteboard. And I was going to read from that whiteboard. And I was going to get my glasses out, and I was going to look over and make sure that I covered every specific thing I wanted to cover. I found out that that's not really the way that I can do it, and that's not who I am anyways. I just get up here, and whatever comes into my mind that's important, I'm just going to mention it. It's not going to be perfect. You know, I might stutter. I might say a lot. I'm going to work on that, but the content is really what counts. So, that being said, let's get into the financial portion of this week's episode. Last week, we talked about paying yourself first. This is between episode 1 and episode 2. We talked about paying yourself first and how that's really the way to build wealth. If you don't see it and it comes out of your check, you'll get used to spending less amount of money as long as you don't see it. If you rely on yourself to go invest that money, you probably won't do it. If you do, you're super diligent, and I give you a lot of kudos for that. We talked about IRAs, we talked about 401ks, other plans, 453s, 403s, depending on whether you work for the government, whether you work as a teacher, whether you're self-employed, you would have an IRA. There's lots of, and we'll get into all the details on those, and we did get into a little bit last week, but what I wanted to talk about this week is how to effectively manage your money in the current situation that we have. And that current situation right now, and I'm affected as well, that current situation is extremely high interest rates. High interest rates erode your purchasing power. Your $100 doesn't buy as much as it used to 2 years ago before inflation hit 9%, 8.3%. That's kind of the summary of that. So what you need to do is you need to try to find investments that are going to allow you to mitigate some of what's going on with inflation, because inflation, interest rates high, most often will lead to a recession. A recession, not a good thing for equities, not a good thing for stocks, because in a recession, earnings have to come down. Companies can't buy back as much stock as they might want to. They may cut their dividend payouts. They need more capital to grow revenues. And whereas they used to be able to borrow that money at probably close to 0% over the past 10 years, now their borrowing costs are much higher. So we've got a lot of what they call headwinds coming at us right now. And it's going to be with us for a while. That's why I wanted to get into, within your own 401k, IRA, whatever investment vehicle you have to be diversified. And I think we might have touched on this either in episode 1 or episode 2, but I think the example of, say, Lockheed Martin, and you don't want to have all of your apples in one basket, so to speak, because you're totally at the whim of whatever that stock is going to do. What you want to do is you want to spread your risk out. And mutual funds are great for spreading the risk out. They invest in many different stocks so that when some stocks are going up, other stocks are going down, and it kind of blunts this whole thing of going like this, where either everything's going up or everything's going down in your portfolio. You know, if you want to consider that like this, we kind of want to make it like this. It's never going to be perfect. This year, pretty much everything is losing money, but we can try to minimize that to the extent that we can. The way that people do that, again, is either by buying mutual funds, and we'll get into mutual funds a lot more, or you can buy individual stocks if you feel comfortable with that, but they need to be in different sectors of the economy. And when I say different sectors of the economy, I'm going to tell you what I believe the main sectors to be. You have high technology. That might be something like a Google, Although some people would argue Google is not technology, but might be a stock like Google, might be a stock like any of the semiconductor stocks. They would be considered high technology because, you know, they go into pretty much everything that we do, whether it be cars, whether it be laptops, whether it be artificial intelligence. That's high technology. Next down the tier, we probably look at the other biggies as healthcare. Healthcare is a great sector to be invested in when inflation is high. They can be somewhat immune to inflation. They usually pay high dividends, which is great. That helps blunt inflation, the effects of inflation. And those would be companies like Pfizer, Merck, Bristol Myers. I'm sure we've probably heard of those companies. Next in line, we would have the financial industry. Financials are generally good when interest rates go up, but not good if we go into a recession. Because what happens is people start defaulting on their loans, and financial industries have to write those loans off. And so financials in this environment are probably a neutral right now. But again, they're a diversifier. And when we say these different sectors, we're diversifying our portfolio, whether it's through mutual funds or buying individual stocks. So good examples of financials would be JP Morgan, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo. Those are all stocks that we would, look at when we think of financials. Other sectors, and now we're getting into more of the things that are less prone to go up and down super quick, and that would be consumer staples. Now, consumer staples are things that everyone has to buy. So think of your Procter & Gamble's, think of your Colgate-Palmolive's, think of Heinz, Mondelez, those types of stocks. Actually, Heinz is not a stock in and of itself. It's been bought by another company. But those are I'm trying to go down the grocery store aisle and tell you what kind of General Mills, Kellogg's, those type of things that when you go in the grocery store, you're like, well, I have to eat, so I've got to buy those things. Or I have to, be able to clean my house, so I got to buy things like Windex and Resolve and stuff like that. Next would be consumer discretionary. Now, as opposed to the staples, which we have to buy in order to live, consumer discretionaries are things that we don't absolutely need to live, but we might like those things. And those would be things like Home Depot. If you go to Home Depot, if you go to Starbucks, those would be two good examples of consumer discretionary companies. Darden, which owns Olive Garden, that would be another consumer discretionary. You don't have to do that, but you might want to do that if you're able to. So those are discretionary versus staples. Another one, which is has always been a big outlier, hasn't really performed well over the past, 10 years maybe, but it certainly has done well this year, is energy. And energy, boy, you can really lump that. You can lump a whole bunch of things into the energy sector. That would be your oil and gas companies. That would be now your EV companies, your companies that support electric vehicles, whether that be the manufacturers, the battery companies, all those different types of companies that support either the electric vehicle industry, which is up and coming for sure, or the old internal combustion engine companies like Ford and GM. Those would be something that would rely more on the gas and oils. And we're going to talk about like ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron. Those would be good examples of oil and gas companies. There are some specific gas companies, but you might not recognize them. Well, I shouldn't say that. Hess, Valero perhaps, but they're into oil as well. EV companies, everybody thinks of Tesla. Certainly that's a car company, but they're heavily into EV. There's also companies that just do the battery charging stations. There's one called ChargePoint. They do the electric battery stations, so another one. Then you've got a big sector called your industrials. The industrials are the big companies that you would kind of keep the economy grinding along. You could think of things like Deere, John Deere Company, Caterpillar, Boeing, Honeywell. Those would be called industrials. There's little splinter segments on industrials like Lockheed Martin, but they're in the defense industry specific. So there's all kinds of little tentacles that come out from these different sectors. But those are pretty much the sectors. And what those will do is if you own stocks in each of those sectors, or if you own a mutual fund that has a good distribution of stocks in each of those sectors, you're going to blunt the effects that inflation is going to have. Right now, I would venture to say that average growth funds, and I don't know this as of today, but average growth funds that need money to survive, that need to go get loans to produce revenues, they're down huge. They're down either anywhere between 20 and 85% from their all-time highs. More stable companies, like some of the ones we just mentioned, they're probably still down anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20%, maybe even more. But again, what we're trying to do is blunt the effects of inflation until we can get through this cycle. When inflation starts coming back down, it ultimately will, but there is a lag effect. The Federal Reserve, and I know I'm getting into a lot of detail here, the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates in order to combat inflation and bring it down. When that inflation comes down and they do what's called a pivot, which means inflation has gotten to their target, whatever that target is going to be, then you will start to see money start flowing back into the equity markets, which is, basically the stock market, stocks, bonds, things like that. Excuse me, we haven't touched too much on bonds, so we'll get into bonds next week. We'll get into money market accounts. We'll get into CDs. We'll get into those types of investment vehicles next week. They used to be very, very unattractive because you could probably get more interest. Well, you couldn't get more interest, but putting your money under your mattress was probably getting the same amount of interest that a bank was going to pay you on X amount of dollars that you put with them. It was incredibly low, the interest rate that they would pay you. Now, that's changed a bit because interest rates have gone up. Banks are able to loan money out at a higher interest rate to companies. So the money that they have coming in from your savings, they can pay you a higher interest on that. So there's absolutely going to be a part in a good portfolio for cash or cash equivalents. If you want to think of this as kind of like a pie chart, you're going to have some level of cash, which you should always have, and I'm talking about investment purposes, some level of cash. You should have some level, perhaps, of bonds or bond type equivalents. And then I would propose your largest portion of your investment portfolio should be in the stock market, because they've proven over and over and over that the stock market is really the way that you're going to build your wealth, keep up with inflation. You're not going to do it with money market funds. You're not going to do it with bonds, but they all have their place in a good, well-diversified investment portfolio. So I think I've talked enough for today. If you're getting any benefit out of these podcasts, hopefully you are, both the fitness portion and the finance portion. Please hit the like button. If you want to subscribe, that would be great also. I think I got into some detail today that perhaps might have went over some people's heads. I apologize for that. As we go on, I'll continue to explain reiterate, but the ultimate goal here is going to be able to get you, regardless of where you are in your life, whether you are in your 20s or whether you are in your 70s and 80s, there's going to be a perfect investment portfolio balance for you at every age. And again, the best way for anyone who's currently working is put that money into your savings plan at work or put it into your IRA. Again, if you don't see the money, you won't have the opportunity to spend it. And what you'll be doing every week or bi-weekly, depending on how you get paid, when you put money into that investment, you're going to be doing what's called dollar cost averaging. That term gets thrown around all the time. It makes a lot of sense, especially at any age that you are working and investing. Dollar cost averaging is great. I'm going to explain how that works next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about portfolio construction at different ages, and then we'll just continue to keep building on this basic format. All right. Hope you enjoyed it again, and until next time, have a great day.